Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everyone, to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Kevin Garrison. I want to mention to everyone that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base at NeoSystems. Our focus as a managed service provider is primarily on organizations seeking certification. So that's who we have mostly in our audience today. If you do have some questions from the audience, please send those in on the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I'll try to work those into the conversation. So in addition to Kevin, we also have Wade Forbes are drawing the conversation, and we'll send out some copies of that drawing. You can see it happening on the screen, and you can get some copies of that. We'll email out to the attendees afterwards. I'll start with the introduction of Kevin. Kevin is a research staff member at the Institute for Defense Analysis, IDA. He previously worked as the Chief of Analytics for the DoD CIO, as well as holding several other senior analyst positions within the DoD, all that building upon a career as an Army infantry officer. So Kevin, thanks for your service to our country, and thanks for joining us today. Kevin, you're on mute there, I think. Yeah.
Glad to be here. Pleasure to be
Kevin,
here.
thanks for joining us. There's been the topic for today really is zero trust, and there's been a lot of talk about zero trust over the past few years. Want to explore kind of the evolution of that concept, what its promise is for the future, and specifically how it might intersect with some of the CMMC and other compliance preparations that our audience members are taking on right now. So let's start with a little bit of background. Zero trust as a security concept isn't brand new, but really has been, it's been the buzzword of the day here for the last couple of years. How is the zero trust security model different than more traditional sort of perimeter-based approaches, and why is focus shifting towards it right now? What's causing that?
So this is all my personal opinion, but it's based on having read a lot of stuff. I would say the principal difference is that the perimeter model, which we've employed for years, you have firewall and another wall and another wall and security layers on top of security layers. In the theory that each layer adds, depending on what layer of the network you're at, it adds another measure of security. The zero trust model basically said you start with some certain core principles, least trust, and some other, they've been around for years, not new principles. And you only selectively give people access based on a certain set of rules, as opposed to just, I got through firewall A, I got through application B, I put my password in and I'm into the system. So it's actually a different approach, which is more granular. As a guy at work put it today, instead of wrapping all your candy up in bulk, you individually wrap all the candies. That's a good way to think about it. So every application running the network has to be enabled to do the least privilege and only give people access that they meet certain conditions. It's hard, very hard to do. So that's the big difference. So there's a tremendous installed base of perimeter security vendors that will sell you firewalls that do X, Y, and Z, and the terminology keeps changing all the time. And you can have 20 sets of security stuff running on your network, but it's still designed to run a model that the castle wall, then the interior wall, then the crown jewels are in the special vault. That's that model. Zero trust says you got to assume every communication is from a bad person, and you would only let them in and communicate with them if they met your conditions to be trusted. So zero trust is a misnomer. It's one of those great IT terms like cloud that pretty soon gets to mean whatever you want it to mean, depending on who's talking at the time. So it sometimes obfuscates as much as clarifies, but that's the basic difference between the two. I've said this before, but Microsoft, if you go to the Microsoft security page, has some really well done, well written stuff on what zero trust means and what the elements of it are that you can actually understand, because written by people who wrote it in English instead of in geek speak. Google has a similar set of stuff that's a little bit more technical. They call it Beyond Corp, C-O-R-P. I don't know where they got that weird term from, but I think it's beyond the corporation. But they went to a zero trust model, and they have a series of papers on how they did it. I would say the Microsoft stuff is a little more candid about how hard it is. The Google stuff has a few steps where it's there's that 1,000-pound barbell on the floor, just pick it up. and you're looking around where the other 5 people are going to help me do that, because it's not a doable do. So the core elements of a zero trust architecture are basically you have to know the identity of everything. So every device connected to the network. That's an inherently hard problem that people struggle with all the time, because devices get turned on, get turned off, get lost, get stolen. Or with an IoT device, they don't have any maybe security number or MAC ID or anything to identify exactly what it is. So that's a hard problem. So you have to have that up to date. You have to have the people part of it. So the identity of people has to be managed, which you can do with a credential or a cert or some form of that. In the government, you have the common access card or the PIV card, which has a chip, and that's how we identify you. So there's some root of trust that says some identity system has issued this credential that says you're Kevin Garrison. And if you put your magic code number in to assert that, to prove that you're Kevin Garrison, we will trust that you are Kevin Garrison. And we have 2-factor authentication, other methodologies to do this, to identify the person on the network. And then the third component is you have a rules engine that says, if that is Kevin Garrison, and it's Thursday, and he's in his office at the building where I know where it is and connected to that network, I will allow him access to system X. So system X has to know that set of rules. You can do some of that centrally, but it really is a decentralized security model where each application implements zero trust. So it's hard because then you want to get scaled behavior. People are doing it the right way for every application across the network. So it's very hard. So the Microsoft folks are very candid. It says it's a 10-year journey. You're not going to get there overnight. It's going to take a lot of hard work. The Google folks talk about how they had to incrementally roll out the rule set across their sub networks because, they thought they had everything covered, but then they forgot about edge case X, and all of a sudden these 50 people weren't able to connect and do their job. So to roll it back, adjust the rules engine, try again, iteratively implement the rule set. Now we have that in current model, for example, we have blacklists and whitelists. So one of the default settings is supposed to be that you should deny access unless given permission. And I actually talked to the gentleman who had been the lead Navy cybersecurity person on the island of Guam when they tried to turn their network from basically default accepting, deny in some cases, to default deny, accept only if proven to be good. And it took them 3 years and a lot of loud shouting conversations over the phone about, you dirty people turned off my access. I need it back right now. So it's very hard to do. And that was an island with basically one pipe coming in. So if you're here in CONUS and you're connected 5 different ways to the internet, trying to go to a default deny, except only in certain cases, is very hard. So the conversion from whatever you're doing right now, perimeter model, to a zero trust model, the Microsoft folks are very candid. It's going to take you a while. If you don't have, and most companies are not going to have the internal chops to pull it off. So you're probably going to have to do something like get there by either going onto somebody's platform that has implemented zero trust. That would be one way to get there, but it's very hard. And if you try and do it yourself, you're going to need a lot of technical expertise. And frankly, most companies just don't. The talent hardly exists, and it's at the big companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook. And so it's hard to get that level of talent. And then, once you get a zero trust model working, it needs to be maintained because people change jobs. Kevin becomes a supervisor. Now he's allowed to see System X that has people's evaluations in it. All those rules change all the time. Somebody comes on board, somebody gets offboarded. So keeping your zero trust model updated with current rule sets is not for the faint of heart. It's going to be hard. I would say your average small, medium-sized business is probably not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to go buy zero trust from somebody else. To your point, there's a lot of people out there. It's marketing, right? So now everybody's selling zero trust. Zero trust is one of those squishy terms that you want to understand exactly what this thing does and what part of zero trust it helps you implement. The identity factor authentication part, that's pretty well bounded. The rules engine is actually something that you in the company you're in have to make the decision about. Am I going to do that by groups? Like supervisors generically are allowed access to X, and I don't care if it's Kevin or Elizabeth or Ed or Wade, as long as they have supervisor role. Well, but then the question is, how do I know that they're supervisors? Some database that says these people are supervisors. And how do I know that that database is up to date? So it's, in general, all this identity stuff has to be hardwired to your, building access or credentialing system inside your company that has a database that keeps up at the right level of granularity with who has permission to do what based on what role they have. And I think you can see how that's in a company beyond about 5 people that gets real hard, real fast. And just keeping track of who's in what group can be hard. You have special roles, then you have subcontractors perhaps that you're doing business with, and you got a different rule set for them. So it get really hard. It get complicated very quickly.
Your point about sort of the hard parts of implementing it, the starting point is a challenge, right? Most people, if you look at going from something that's very coarse grained to something that's very fine grained, people don't necessarily know what kind of activities are normal on their network. And so there's some approaches that say, let's start by taking a snapshot of behavior that's happening today. And we assume that everything that's happening today is acceptable. We build rules around that. That's good unless there's something bad happening on your network that you're not aware of, right? So picking a starting point is certainly one of the tougher challenges, no question about it.
Well, that assumes you would be able to identify what was good and bad behavior on your network right now. And
probably can't.
That's a pretty hard problem for pretty much everybody.
Yep.
Because if somebody's already in your system and they've embedded themselves and they're hiding, then the bad behavior may look like good because it's been part of your norm for so long. So this is part of the challenge of trying to, when everybody sometimes are using AI and machine learning to get after cybersecurity, that should be taken with a grain of salt because there's sparse data sets in many cases. It's kind of like your fire alarm. No. Every second for 5 years, all of a sudden there's a fire, it pops hot once, right? Well, you got one signal out of 5 years. Well, you can sample a lot of data and not know a lot because you've just sampled a bunch of no's, and your data set didn't include the one yes. And that can happen on cyber where the yeses are already buried in there, but you can't see them because you just didn't have the right settings turned on your security stuff, or they were already in by the time you bought, the new security thing and put it on your network and they were already embedded. So, this is to get inside privilege escalation, move laterally. The MITRE ATT&CK framework does a nice job of laying this out. They've got a new one on defend. I haven't actually looked at that one, but the attack kind of, gets after how the bad people get into your system and do bad stuff. In fact, actually it's been found on the network having been translated into various languages by people who tend to attack our network. So, shortcuts both ways.
So kind of breaking out, I want to spend another second on the buzzword bingo here. So you're right, a lot of vendors have been slapping a zero trust label on things. A couple of related terms that we've seen, one I had and then one that came in from an audience question. Assumed breach is kind of a posture that we've talked about. And audience member asked about secure access service edge, SASE, secure access service edge. Are these related? How are these related to zero trust in the sense of, are they steps beyond it? Are they steps towards it?
So I'm not at all familiar with SASE. So, it's an automotive term. So I don't know security environment, so I can't help on that. Assume breach is a nice phrase, right? It basically says, assume the bad people are already in your network. Okay, cool. Now what? All right, this assumes I can then, do I have the wherewithal and the tools and the people to then discover where they are in my network and then get them out? And then why would I feel good that I've kept them out? So it's basically, be paranoid. Okay, but now what? So, so you should basically, if you don't think you've been breached, you probably have, you just don't know it. That's kind of one of the mantras too. The other interesting statistic is it turns out that companies usually get breached a second time within the next 2 years. There's some ridiculously high percentage of that. You'd kind of think after the first time you'd take steps to prevent it, but apparently not. So it's a nice phrase. It's a good idea. You should assume that your network's been compromised, which should get you to thinking about your network in terms of, and this is really hard. This is one of the really hard things about zero trust part of it. This kind of a tacit thing is you have to know the value of the information in your network. So you have to have some sort of methodology or approach or framework for how you're going to decide what's really important. You know, is it my employees' personnel data, PII, personally identifiable information, their healthcare stuff? Is their salary super secret? Their bonus structure super secret? So I want to put that double, triple secret encrypted in a different part of my network so it can't be gotten to. So this is where you have to sit down and do the hard work about, of all the data I have in my company, you know, what's in terms of either risk or value to me, us as a company, what's the most sensitive? And that's the stuff you want to make sure you've got double C protected so it can't be ransomware. And if they ransomware your parking ticket system, okay, we forego the revenue from the parking tickets for a couple months while we get a new one built and put in or something. So so that's another one of those hard things associated with zero trust is you have to A, know the data on your network, which is a very hard task. And then B, you have to make some hard calls about the value or the risk or both. And then you have to then go get the people who know how to implement the right security measures to make sure that the value of the information is commensurate with how you've got it protected instead of flipped, where the most valuable stuff is the easiest to steal. But everybody thinks they've done something like this, but it changes all the time. So it's a hard task because it's not static. It's not one and done. It's every X number of months you need to review. Did we get a new data set? Did we get a new subcontractor on that we're on a new contract that has a whole bunch of sensitive DoD data that now I didn't really have to measures in place to protect before, but now they have to, and it's going to cost me some money, and where's that money come from? And so this is hard. I mean, if cybersecurity was easy, it wouldn't be any fun, but it's just a whole bunch of really hard problems. So I'm back to the original one. I don't know anything about SASE. There is a bunch of stuff going on the IoT problem that I kind of keep my eye on, but there's so much it's hard. But the basic Internet of Things problem is all these little sensors are usually, the software is done by one person, the hardware is done by a different person, the firmware is done by a third, and it's assembled someplace and put together and shipped with no security. It's just inherently not, there's no way to even implement security if you wanted to. A lot of the devices are so little memory, you couldn't implement a crypto if you wanted to. There's not enough memory on the device. The communications protocols that they use to communicate with the mother sensor or whatever that is connected to the network can be compromised in a New York minute by anybody who knows what they're doing. So this whole, how do you segment your network traffic and keep your IoT devices, someone from hacking your corporate data because they got in through your thermostat. There's a famous case where they got in through the aquarium in the casino. The big aquarium in the lobby was digitized somehow, and they got into that and then got into the computer networks. So these were all, so the unique identification of devices on the network with an Internet of Things kind of thing, or Internet of Sensors, which don't have identities, is really hard. And so there's some technical approaches, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a human problem. And when I was a DoD civilian, we wrote a white paper on the implications of the Internet of Things for the Department of Defense. And we wrote a negative scenario and we wrote a positive scenario to kind of amplify that. So the negative scenario was the Secretary of Defense is in her Suburban headed down to do a classified testimony on the Hill. And she's rehearsing in the Suburban on the way there, right? What questions we're going to get asked. Well, the Suburban has got a bunch of electronic devices on it. All the people in the Suburban have electronic devices, some of which are government, some of which are personal, like your Apple Watch or your Fitbit or your hearing aids or your electronic pacemaker or your dialysis machine, medical devices. And the car is instrumented and it's talking to the road because it's a smart road. And there's a drone flying around overhead. And how do you know that's a good drone or a bad drone? And how do you know that the classified information that the secretary is discussing in the Suburban isn't leaving the Suburban. Right? Now, for the president of the United States, we'll probably come up with a Faraday cage solution that probably works because it's the president. But once you get past the top two levels, it becomes too expensive and too hard to deny all those systems that want to connect to something connections persistently. Same problem happens. I wear my hearing aids, which are Bluetooth enabled. I go into a skiff, right? While I'm in the skiff, if it's a real skiff, not a paper skiff, and it's a Faraday cage, so the electronic magnetism can't get out, okay. But I hear a bunch of stuff while I'm in the skiff, and I walk out, and now my hearing aids want to connect to my phone, and my phone wants to connect to who knows what, right? And how do we know that something didn't come off my hearing aid, go into my phone, and go someplace? Right. So that was the negative scenario, right? Enough to turn your hair white. The positive one is, all the things you could do about making your life at work better, where you go up to the security turnstile and it does a visual recognition of you. And instead of having to put your card and swipe and do all that stuff, it just lets you in, right? Or, excuse me here, and then, as you get to the secure suite that you're going to work in, it knows that you're coming and the door opens. So the coffee and your briefcase you're carrying, you don't have to put down to swipe your card and put your magic code in to get in the door. And then you could order lunch from your desk and it would be delivered to you by the robot. We kind of did all the positive things of an IoT enabled workspace would make your work experience much more fun. Your computer would already be booted up, waiting for you when you sat down instead of sitting down and starting the whole boot sequence. So we wrote those up and it just kind of amplified the problem. And those are little mini cases of a larger cybersecurity problem about how do you protect DoD's information. So to come back to CMMC, the whole point of the CMMC process was to better protect DoD sensitive information. So, the next F-35 isn't rolling off production lines in China before it rolls off in the US. So the idea of protecting DoD's information, it's hard to argue with, right? I mean, we must do it. The challenge is how, and because of the expansion of technology and the expansion of the persistent connectivity, it keeps getting harder and harder.
So
and
let me bring this back to sort of the practical aspect. You mentioned CMMC, and I had a couple of questions about where that might go, but one of the audience members asked it in a more direct way than my two paragraphs. Audience member said, do you see zero trust becoming a requirement for CMMC certification? So I mean, what do you see that intersection being?
So I will tell you, so CMMC was this thing that's very much aligned with the NIST controls, right? 800 series of pub, and so that's the control approach to security, right? And CMMC is an implementation of that. It's got a, I don't know what level 2 is about, but level 1 is basically simple. Level 3 is basically being able to handle CUI, and then the higher level for only the bigs are probably going to be able to do 4 and 5. Zero trust is an architectural approach, right? So they're really almost orthogonal. And as you've seen, if you've been watching CMMC, some of the challenges of some of the controls are kind of process. Do you have a process for X? Well, how do you grade the goodness of a process, right? And who decides how good is good enough, right? And that's been a lot of the dialogue about CMMC. Because there's some cybersecurity inspections, if you just have a signed piece of paper, you can get a passing grade. Whether you're actually doing it is left as an exercise for the student. So one of the CMM questions is once a year come by with an inspection, once every 3 years, once every 5 years. What if I turn everything off as soon as the inspectors left the building? That's a question for the government, right? While the inspector's in the building checking everything out, I have some reasonable confidence that all the stuff is being done that I'm being told is being done. But that doesn't mean the second the inspector leaves, they don't turn all that stuff off so they can get back to work.
That's the maturity aspect of CMMC. I mean, the goal there is to have the assessor assess that, right? Have these controls been institutionalized? Do they have some reason to believe? So that's I think the first formal attempt we've seen to try to capture that in a way beyond just the sort of inspection, non-inspection, kind of binary model we've had, right? So the idea is the inspector is looking for specific signs of maturity, right? Plans, resources assigned to those plans, that sort of thing. So you mentioned it's an architectural approach.
You can have a great mature program, right? And your lead person leaves, takes a job someplace else, better offer, better money, work from home, whatever, right? And all of a sudden your maturity level went from nice and high to down in the parking lot, right? So this is the whole problem of, how often and how do we feel confident that it's good enough and it stays good enough when maturity is really tied to people and their skill sets and their knowledge level. And then human behavior, of course, sometimes people make mistakes. So, this is a hard problem to solve. But back, so CMM is the goal is to protect you as the information, noble goal. It's that the arguments have been about the tactics and techniques, right? And then some fundamental questions about what's the economic model.
So one of the big things we're seeing with CMMC is people moving to cloud adoption, right? People are doing it as a way to transfer some risk. They're doing it because the cloud providers are coming to the table with solutions that take care of a lot of the compliance requirements for them. But they're moving now to these sort of cloud only models where the notion of perimeter defense starts to get shaky anyway. So if you for some companies, a corporate network is just a collection of home office internet connections, and that enables remote workers to get to some cloud-based resources. How does zero trust as an architectural approach overlay onto that sort of architecture, right? I mean, is that it's starting to become, from a corporate perspective, decentralized. We've gotten rid of the perimeter, but we're centralizing at the cloud provider. How does zero trust intersect with that?
Well, so actually, everybody's kind of going through that now, right? So zero trust is still on that whole hype curve that Gartner has, and the Forrester wave, all the profit, all that stuff. It's over here on the rise, right? The technical, this just had a draft pub on it come out. I don't think it's been finalized yet. They asked for comments. I think it might be getting close to being finalized. So then,
about a year ago, August of 2020.
This publishes, and then everybody has to go build something that complies with NIST, and then there's some usually interesting discussions about how compliant it is. So, people that run around advertising they got a zero trust solution, caveat emptor, because exactly what a government approved zero trust solution looks like hasn't exactly been defined yet. So how you would buy that, I don't know. Now, if you take zero trust, so I want my data to be secure, right? Take all the jargon out. I want my data to be secure. So does going to a cloud platform, help you with keeping your data secure? And the answer is it depends, all right? Because so we had early on, there was a big flee to the cloud. Then the big companies said, wait a minute, I got some stuff I don't want out in the cloud. I want to keep it in my safe deposit box in my house, right? Because it's too sensitive. And I know the cloud people say they're all got it all secure, but I'm not taking that chance. Or it's my core financial application. I'm not moving that to the cloud. I'm keeping that in-house. Well, then you got a problem of some of your data is over here and some of your data is in-house. And now you've increased the complexity of your IT environment and your cybersecurity environment because you got the stuff in-house that you have to secure and protect. And then you have to know enough about how the cloud vendor is doing it. Because on the cloud, it depends on whether you're doing software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then your security responsibilities vary significantly depending on what service model you're using to subscribe to the cloud. And that means you got to have people who understand that stuff. And then the other problem here is, well, it's all the same kind of stuff. All the platforms use different terminology, right? For market differentiator, why, right? To make it hard. So you can know a lot about how Azure does it, Microsoft Azure, and understand their lingo, but you want to go over to Amazon and you got to learn a new foreign language. It's like Arabic and Farsi, all right? I mean, you got to learn it because it's Sage. All the things in Amazon have different names with different terms, and they mean slightly different things. So how you implement your security model to make sure your stuff that's out in Amazon is secure, it's going to look a lot like architecturally like it does for Microsoft, but you're going to need two different teams that speak the foreign languages to make sure the stuff that's on Azure is secure and the stuff that is on Amazon is secure in a way that you understand what Amazon's doing and you understand what Azure's doing and what your responsibilities are with regard to identity, or encryption or management of keys, or all those little details that, the famous S3 buckets that are insecure where stuff, people's stuff keeps getting exposed on the internet because, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to manage the keys that encrypted that bucket. Well, that's why you need, if you're going to do multiple cloud environments, you're signing up to have multiple teams that understand those cloud environments and what your responsibilities are and how to implement security. It's not simple. It's not, you're going to hire one person who speaks 7 languages and you're going to have your stuff on your 7 different cloud environments secure. No way, Jose. You're going to need teams because there's a security person, there's the data. You're going to need a couple people for each cloud environment if you're more than 2 people in your company, because it's that complicated. And it changes all the time. I mean, I get the Azure blog and the Amazon blog, and they have a cadence of, we released new capability X, a new product Y, with a whole bunch of names that sometimes don't have anything to do with what doesn't appear to have anything to do with what this thing actually does. So then keeping it all straight and having the decoder ring of, okay, that thing on Amazon is roughly equivalent to that thing over there on Microsoft is not, that's a part-time FTE job just to keep that translator table up to date. Then if you get Google, it gets way too hard. So, and that's just a couple of the major vendors, let alone a whole raft of minor ones in Oracle and IBM, but they all have different terminology. They all do things slightly differently. And so back to the original problem, I got my stuff on-prem that I got to keep secure. And I have my IT team that does that and does help desk calls. And I lost my ID card and all that kind of stuff. And then you got the cloud credentials where how do I validate identity? How am I doing encryption in the cloud? How do I manage the security in the cloud? How do I know the stuff is secure? And then the costing part of it about how much am I spending and does that make sense? And maybe I ought to turn that app between midnight and 4 in the morning off, so I'm not paying for it because I'm not using it then. Because we're an East Coast company that only does this between 9 and 5 o'clock, so I don't need the thing running at 10 o'clock at night. All those kinds of variables that, reality of trying to run a business. So this, so the cyber stuff is really hard, and it's on top of all the other stuff that's already hard, which helps explain, you just look at human behavior about why so many bad things seem to be happening so often. Because there's so many companies, everybody needs IT, and there's only so much talent, and people make mistakes, and all of a sudden, it's a, so-and-so firm got ransomware, or this happened, or that happened, or so-and-so's records got exposed. Now, not people doing evil, it's just that some cases they just don't know because it's hard to stay current. I've been personally trying to bird dog Amazon and Microsoft, and I gave up on Amazon because I ran out of short-term RAM. I mean, I just went with Microsoft. So I pay attention to Microsoft because that's the one I have enough bandwidth to pay attention to.
Kevin, we're kind of at the end of our time. I want to ask kind of a wrap-up question here, just with a minute or so left. Actually, we're a couple minutes over, so we'll keep it a short wrap-up. But I always like to ask about how we can get better results, sort of more bang for the time and effort, right? So to your point, some of these things are very hard. People have limited resources. So for the time and effort we're putting in, as you're watching companies react to CMMC, other DoD policies that are coming out, what's kind of one piece of advice for those that are making decisions about cyber defenses that are going to be where the bang for the buck is? Where should we be looking?
So it's all about, there's people, process, and technology, right? So when it comes down to is hire good people. You hire good people and you treat them right, your chances of things coming out better, no matter what it is, go way up relative to you try and spend a nickel on a dollar and expect to get $5 worth of product. So I would just say invest in people. So if you're concerned about cybersecurity, and you should be, then you should be willing to invest the money to hire the talent you need to make sure your stuff is secure. And if you get a talented person, when the government keeps moving the goalposts, your talented person will keep up with the moving goalposts. And if you want to go, hire a part-time hired gun and hope that gets you into the end zone, that might work. Maybe that's all the money you have and you have to do it, but pay for the talented hired gun, right? So not the first salesman that comes knocking on your door. Do your homework to make sure you're buying real talent. And that, there's a lot of marketing fluff out there, so that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but
And there's a lot of marketing dollars towards selling technology to solve the security problem, and it's nowhere near as profitable to be out there selling people, right? So I appreciate the emphasis there. I think it's accurate. It's too easy to buy a technology, cloud service, or security product and assume it's a silver bullet. But all these things need active supervision, active management. So I definitely agree on the people side. Well, Kevin, thanks very much. Appreciate your time and good advice today, good insights on zero trust and some of the challenges, some of the promises that it makes. Audience members, I want to thank you for your time and attention and the great questions you sent in. Please join us for future town hall sessions. We're going to be continuing this series next week at our regular time of Wednesday, it'll be July 21st at 1 o'clock Eastern. Please join us. If you don't have the info, you can reach out to neosystemscorp.com. I did see an audience question coming through that I think Elizabeth was handling about how to get copies of the drawings that Wade is doing for us. So yeah, you should be getting those. If you've registered for today's session, you should be getting that by email. If you don't, please hit the contact page on our website and ask. There may be some problem with the email, maybe it's getting spam filtered or something like that. But yeah, if you're attending and registering for these, you should be getting a response back on that email address that you used to register. So thanks everyone, have a good day.